Live.
Love of money is a root of all evil. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We meet you again on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. live on TV1. Tonight, our topic of discussion is the current state of the country's economy. Where are we really heading in the next few years, next few months? And as far as the next generation is concerned, are we doing the right things? Are we pulling the right plug or are we not pulling the right plug as far as the country's economy is concerned? To discuss all this and more, we've invited 4 guests to our studios this evening as well. Joining us this evening on the show are Sujeeva Mudalige, CEO of PwC Sri Lanka, Madhushanka Disanayake, Department of Public Administration, University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, Ravi Abesurya, Advocacy Chair and Director, CFA Society of Sri Lanka. Also joining us tonight on the show is Dr. Rohantha Tukorala, former Chair of the EDB and Sri Lanka Tourism. Let's get the ball rolling with Sujeeva Mudalige. Before that, let me quickly introduce our journalists this evening on the show. On to my immediate right is Shania Dadigama, on to my immediate left is Shalan Benedict, and on to my far left today on the show, joining us this evening as guest journalist is Shihar Anis, Head of Training, Center for Investigative Reporting, Sri Lanka, and Consultant Editor, Economy Next. Thank you very much, Shihar, and looking forward to your participation on our discussion tonight on Face the Nation. Let's get the ball rolling, as I said before, with Sujeeva Mudalige, CEO of PwC Sri Lanka. What are your thoughts on the current state of the country's economy?
Thank you, Shamir, for the invitation to be here tonight. I think let me start with 2 statements that President Wickremesinghe made in the recent past. A few months ago, he stated that the country is bankrupt, and he has mentioned this over and over again. And 2 days ago, at the economic summit, he stated that we have no economy, and he said he has no plans for reform because there is no economy in place. I mean, that's a very serious statement. Why did he make these 2 statements? I think it's important to understand the context. On 12th of April, we declared ourselves bankrupt. That's the first point. 7th of March, we allowed the rupee to float, right, from 202, and now we are 360. So we have the currency has depreciated 80%. The second point. Third one, you are running a private business here. You are borrowing at 30%. That's our interest rate. Fourth one, our inflation, food inflation is at about 100%, and overall inflation is just under 70%, slightly come down over the last couple of months. Our debt to GDP is at about 130%. Our budget deficit is double digit, right? It's more than 10%. It could be anything even up to about 12%. So, I mean, this is where we are today. And so I think President Wickremesinghe has quite rightly said, we are bankrupt and we have no economy to reform as such. So that's why he has said we need to start afresh, right? So that's a very, very serious statement. So taking that into account, I mean, we need to see what needs to be done. And I think we also need to see how did we get here. Maybe we can discuss it later on. And what do we need to do in the short to medium term? So I think one thing which I want to say upfront is, with these kind of environment in which we are there right now, there is no question of getting out of it by simply tightening your belts. In Sinhalese you say, patitada karaganna. Your politicians will say, patitada karaganna. We are not going to get out of this simply by tightening the belts at this stage. And we'll get on to the details maybe in the next round.
Thank you very much, Sujeeva Mudalige, CEO of PwC Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Madhushanka Disanayake, Department of Public Administration, University of Sri Jayawardhanapura.
Okay, Shamir, thank you very much for the invitation. So actually I would like to pay the attention of the general public about my concern about how we address or how we identify problems as a country. So I would like to start my explanation by citing an example which is previously explained by Niccolo Machiavelli. That is, when it comes to maybe in relating to health, so in early stages it's very difficult for us to recognize a problem. But when it comes to if we do not recognize them at the proper stage, the nature of the problem is it will silently, it will grow. So then there will be a stage where even a general person can recognize there is a problem. So I think as a country, how we address or how we recognize problems, whether we are addressing the real problem or are we identifying the real problem, or are we doing the recommendations or relevant intervention at the right time is my point. So let me to explain that in detail. That means when it comes to our present situation, my opinion is unhealthy fiscal policy is the main concern or main reason for the situation what we are at the moment. But what our people, especially the people who are responsible for the fiscal policy, what they are doing is, for my opinion, so they are trying to hide the problem. How we can hide the problem? We can put some icing on that. We can decorate the problem. So then we will, the general public, because they do not have the technical understand or technical knowledge to understand these things, so therefore they are trying to put certain icing and certain decorations, and they are trying to do certain things to hide the problem. But the thing is, if we want to get out of the problem, these putting icing or decorating the problem is not the solution. At the moment, what we are doing is actually we are decorating the problem. So we are not identifying the problem, or even we are not starting to solve the problem. So that is my opinion about the country. We are putting certain icing on the problem.
Thank you very much, Madhushangal Sanayaka, Department of Public Administration, University of Sri Javardhanapura. Now I move my attention to Ravi Abesurya, Advocacy Chair and Director, CFA Society, Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Shami. I think Sujiva very clearly explained the economic predicament or the fundamentals the country is facing. I will take a slightly different view of what reforms, what needs to change if we are to get out of this crisis. This is an unprecedented crisis after we got independence in 1948 that Sri Lanka is facing. So if we are to get out of this, a complete system change is absolutely critical. There is no way we can go, the same status quo can remain, which means changing the very people who govern us and bringing the right ethics and standards and governance standards to our government which runs the country. Because we take a lot of effort to put in high governance standards in companies or banks, but the most ultimate impactful for the country is how the country is governed. And in that sense, we have the worst possible set of people who have been running this country for 70 years. So, the public need to understand who they send to the parliament to govern us if they want a future, not a bath packet or tomorrow, or look at very short-term benefits. If they want to look forward to better future for their children or grandchildren, they have to send the right people. And that change has to come, because we know economic ruin has been brought about by a set of people. And now everybody in this country is paying for that damage they have done. Are we going to send the same set of people again? It will just a change of color or some name. Is it that what we want? Or we need a complete system change to send the right people. How are you going to send the right people? I will explain later on. But that's the most important thing if we are to do, keep the democracy, but send a right set of people to the parliament and bring the necessary changes.
Ravi, because you have a few more seconds to go to wrap up your 2 minutes, let me quickly pose another question to you to get some clarity. You say that over the last 70 years we've been governed by the worst people. If that is the case, who are the alternatives that we're talking about?
The alternative people should be people with integrity who has a passion to change the way country is governed, or have the kind of right inclination to bring in that changes which are unpopular but long term country will benefit. All this time we see people who go to the parliament are only interested in next election to win the election. So you need that change set of people. It can be any party, but ultimately people who have the love of the country and to bring that change.
People with integrity are the ones who should be governing the country, that's for sure. I now move my attention to Dr. Rohan Korala, former chair, EDB and Sri Lanka Tourism. What are your thoughts on the country's state of economy?
Thank you, Shamir, and appreciate for the invite. I come from a marketing background, worked on the field and understand what the consumer sentiments are. And nobody right now is talking about the consumer. We see all the statistics on how the budget expenditure has increased by 31%, while the income is going to go up by 69%, which are all statistics. But no one is talking about the consumer. Do we know that we have 5.8 million households, and out of that 5.8 million, you have the ASCC group, the B, which are about 20%, and then you have the C and the D, which are like 40-40, right? In a normal basket of goods, those days you'll take 48 categories that you buy. In the ASCC group, it has now dropped down to 26. You have in the B category, out of 42, now they are dropped down to 22. So we think that it's only the poor man that is affected, which is not true. The top end, if you take the average consumer, like the C, D, SCC group, they normally buy between 35 to 28 categories, and that has down to about 15 to 18. So this is the top rung. Second point I just like to share is, we have lost 1 million households out of 5.8 million who cannot afford to buy a full cream milk powder. And the latest numbers coming out is that almost 20% of households will not have the ability of buying a milk powder in the next 3 months. I have not heard anyone addressing this in the 225. They are appointed by the people. We talk of everything which are more macro in nature, but you're saying that you're representing people, but you're not actually conceptualizing and understanding what is the real issue. If you look at canned fish, we know that there was a tax increase, but end of the day, 1.2 million households have moved out of buying canned fish, which is like about 20% of Sri Lanka's population. You have almost 66% of households who have moved out of buying a normal soup, right? And just a plain biscuit. We know that a lot of families have biscuits in the morning sometimes. 20% of households are moving out of biscuits because they say they can't afford. So from a very consumer point of view is that we need to ask ourselves, what are the reforms we are going to bring in to help these people? And if somebody is telling me that there is no reform that can be brought in, that means that someone does not understand the economy. For example, we know that in 1995, sorry, I'm just going back to it. I just gave you the reality. I'll just go back in history a little bit. 1995, Sri Lanka's exports was 4 billion.
Yeah. So what we'll do is, Rohan, we'll speak about all this momentarily as the show goes along, because I want to give an equal opportunity for the 4 guests to express their views in the first round, and then via questioning we can grill you all further as to what your point of thought is as far as the country's state of the economy is concerned. Again, let me quickly introduce our journalists. On to my immediate right is Shania, immediate left is Shalan, and on to my far left is Shihar. Let's start off with Shihar for a change today.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Shamir. So, Jay, you talked about raft of the economic situation, and you talked about fiscal conditions. You talked about the change, governance change, and you talked about consumers. Now everybody is talking about everything, and we waited until this economic crisis evolved into the political crisis, right? Until then, nobody talked. Even the media did not critically analyze the policies. Why? Why did this happen? I mean, I don't want to look back the past, but see, it's always good to see why we are in this dire situation now, and how can we prevent this in the future. Sujit?
Yeah, so I think, good question. So I think that in my view, there are 5 reasons as to why we are in this present situation. Right? You may not agree with it, but these are my 5 main reasons. I think a couple of them were touched right now. First one is our fiscal policies, what we have adopted. Right? We've run twin deficits for a long period of time. Right? We have all types of deficits. You name it, we have it. We have the budget deficit. We have a current account deficit. We have a primary account deficit. We have a balance of payment deficit. We have a trade deficit, you name it. So that's bad fiscal management. Number 1, right? Number 2 is what Ravi mentioned about, is our political culture, right? And the constitution. That's a major reason for why we are in this situation. It's my second reason, right? Third reason, law and order, which moves into bribery and corruption. Our 3 main institutions are extremely weak. What are the 3 institutions? The police, the public prosecutor, and the judiciary. Right? We need to strengthen all these 3, and if not, we will be just talking about bribery and corruption only. And that's a law and order issue. That's my third reason. Fourth reason is the entitlement culture that we have as people. Right? Over the years, the politicians, for their own advantage, have said the state will look after you. From the time you are born until you are 6 feet underground, state will look after. Don't worry. Your electricity will be subsidized, your transport will be subsidized, you'll be given free schooling, you'll be given a job, you don't have to contribute, you'll be given a pension, you'll be given everything free. And you vote for me, I'll get you all this. That's the fourth one. So we as people, we are responsible. Fifth one, very few people talk about it. Inability to separate governance from religion. It's a major issue why we are in this. And I give credit to President Wickremesinghe. I think about 2 weeks ago in Parliament he said, the clergy needs to know their role. They just can't get onto the roads and start shouting and screaming. I think he's the only politician after late Mr. Mangala Samaravira, I think, who had the courage to say this. I think it's a historic statement in my view. And he was very blunt about it. So these are the 5 reasons, in my view, has brought about our present condition.
Sujiva, you spoke very eloquently about the situation in which, as Shihar pointed out before, we are in this situation because of these 5 reasons, as you correctly mentioned and articulated in your opinion. But let's talk about the state-owned enterprises alone. In the first 9 months alone, the state-owned enterprises have costed the Sri Lankan government treasury 900 billion, that is approximately or 100 billion Sri Lankan rupees every month. If you look at the fertilizer subsidy, it's only 50 billion. If you look at the Samurdhi, it's only 60 billion. We're talking about Samurdhi, we're talking about fertilizer subsidy without talking about the biggest elephant in the house. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a good point. So if you look at the budget that are presented a month ago, Shamir, is that we have some numbers that have been presented, 77th time, mind you, right? And we do this all the time. What do? We generally overestimate our income and we undercollect. Expenditure, we underestimate and overspend. That's what has happened for 77 years. Generally, that's what happened, and I can tell you fairly confidently, this is what would happen in 2023 as well. Coming back to your point, is so one side of the issue is the expenditure, is what right? So there's massive amount of expenditure that is being spent on maintaining SOEs, as rightly pointed out by you, 900 billion for the first 9 months. It's amazing, it's shocking, if you ask me, right? Health and education budget put together, Shamir, is less than 900 billion. Imagine if you were the secretary to the Ministry of Finance, you can come out and tell the people of this country, SOEs are no longer bleeding. I am going to double the allocation into health and education, and that's all what we require. If you have to get out of this, that's one of the things that we have to do in the short to medium to long term. Increase our spend on health and education. How can we do that without cutting anything else? Stop the bleeding. Stop the bleeding, simple as that.
So,
but
yeah.
politicians will never do that. The reason is this, Shamir.
Mr. Budhige,
SOE reform,
where are
just
the
one
needs?
thing, just
Yeah.
one thing. SOE reforms, Shamir, who wants it? No one wants SOE reforms. The politicians don't want SOE reforms because they can't put their people into these departments. Politicians' families don't want SOE reforms because they can't become the chairman and directors of all these corporations. The trade unions don't want SOE reforms because they want the current status quo to continue. The employees don't want SOE reforms because they like the present system.
And they might risk losing their jobs if the system changes.
They will risk losing their jobs. So who wants it? You and I want it. Why? Because we are taxpayers and we are paying for this. Nobody else wants it. That's why we can't do this. We have not been able to do it for 74 years, Shamir. I hope we can do this because I know President Wickremesinghe is really keen and he's pushing on this. And I wish him good luck. And I hope everyone around him will support. I have my doubts.
Dr. Rohantha, you were speaking about the consumer's point of view. I think this is a point that hasn't been articulated too much on the media. But what really is the impact on the consumers? In your opening statement, you were taking us a little back into the history. This is your opportunity if you can finish up on that point.
See, it's like this, Shalan, we need to ask what is the short-term reforms that we can do to see how we can reduce the pressure on a household. Now, if somebody is saying that there is no reforms that cannot be done, then that means someone doesn't understand the real economy. For instance, our exports to India has been $500 million for the last 10 years. Why is it? Because you have products which have been agreed by the two governments, but the utilization of the FTA is about 2.7%. For example, we get 50 million kilograms of tea. We have 7 million pieces of apparel that we can send abroad. I'm just taking two instances. Why is it that we can't sit together, because India is a friend of Sri Lanka now, and ask how do you utilize this? Because we know there's a recession coming in the US. We know that the orders are not there in the next 3 months. It has dropped by about 35%. Now, why can't we make sure that we can capture that volume so that people can keep on working and their money can come, and then we will not see this movement out of categories. So that's first point that I like to make. And second is the question that was asked by Shian, why do you think this has happened? In my view, there are three reasons. Number one is that the private sector, the chambers, are weak. Chambers don't own up and shout. For instance, have you ever looked at the last 5 budgets and said how much has those budgets were off in the last 2 years? For example, we work for companies, we work for multinational companies. First thing we have done is, what is the income you agreed, what is the expenditure, where are you? Why is it that nobody talks about this? The point that Shamir was talking about fertilizer. How come, why is it that Shamir has to bring it out from the media? Why isn't the private sector shouting and saying, why are we allowing 900 billion to be on the SOEs? Why is it that you guys can't spend it? So the chambers are weak.
Why is that?
That's something that you need to ask them, Shamir. I don't want to go into that, Shian, but that's one. Number two is that we allow corruption. Have we ever seen a private sector chamber shouting about corruption? You see guys, we have worked in multinational, we have worked in private sector, and we have also held government positions, right? The best thing that Sri Lanka could have happened is what we are in right now. Because now, whether you like it or not, you have to do reforms.
But Rohantha, in the defense of the chambers, let's take a look at the National Chamber of Commerce for an example. They've been pressing the government with an economic crisis, not just this year, but a few years ago itself. They've said that this situation will come to this point and we'll be in this worst economic crisis if this matter is not arrested immediately. So they are doing their role, aren't they?
Shamir, people can make statements, but it's about how you follow up on an action. For example, let's take about the 36% pay tax. Has anybody of the chamber said, I'm prepared as the chamber advocate, pay to be paid at the point that income is earned? The companies have to pay. Companies are responsible for it. But can you make sure that nobody is going to rob? The bleeding is going to stop. You're having a bucket which is, there's a hole, and you're saying, guys, put more money in. What is the logic, Shamir?
Mr. Abesura, you were speaking about...
Shazad,
sorry,
if I
yes.
may. Yeah, Mr. Abesura, I just have a question for you. In the last monetary policy review, the governor of the central bank, he basically made the statement that economic recovery will take another 2 to 5 years to actually start taking effect. And now the IMF is waiting on us to present a viable plan for debt restructuring. So where does that leave us if we cannot? Is there a contingency plan supposing that the deadline keeps getting pushed back? Because if we're not going to see economic recovery possibly taking place in the next 2 to 5 years probably, and we can't present a proper plan for debt restructuring, where does that leave us?
Well, to correct you, I think we have put across a debt restructuring plan, which is now under, I would say, discussion with the bilateral lenders, that is India and China, because the Paris Club has agreed and the IMF has agreed to what we have proposed. Now what happens is, because of these two bilateral lenders, particularly China, is uncomfortable with a haircut or take a cut on the capital, they may want some kind of a reprofiling to pay the debt over a longer period, because that could create a precedent for China, because they have lent to so many other countries who are in somewhat similar situation than Sri Lanka. So for them it's a bigger problem. So they want to negotiate, and that negotiation has not come to any conclusion. So that's the delay. I believe something will happen very soon, most probably by January or next year first quarter. We will see that the IMF funding of 2.9 billion, that money will come. So we will get into the track of reforms. We are already in somewhat comfortable situation because we are able to raise sufficient foreign currency to pay our essentials. Though there are a lot of shortages, you can see the fuel queues have gone, the gas queues have gone. So there is some revenue being generated and tourism is picking up. So that is a good side, that we have managed with our own internal generated foreign currency to pay for our foreign purchases or whatever we are importing, because there is no debt servicing. So there is zero debt servicing at the moment.
And so January deadline you feel
is somewhat realistic.
feasible?
It could happen, or at least next year it will happen. I'm
But
strong
Ravi,
believer it will happen.
let's say we are not going to the IMF.
Right.
Because we've seen this happening in countries like Belize, for an example. They've started off negotiations and never gone to the IMF for funding support. So do you think that is a case in point as far as Sri Lanka is concerned? Because we now know the Paris Club has come for our help. They've said a 10-year debt moratorium to be announced, so on and so forth. In that event, do you think there is a very good development on this front?
Yeah, now say for example, taking Brazil as an example, they didn't go to IMF. They have their internal solution. Of course, Brazil is so close to US. US would have ensured that they don't get into a major problem. So likewise, we could have, but I think that is not feasible for a small country like Sri Lanka, and we have a lot of geopolitics, China, India, all in this game. So we need to have the reforms agreed with some party who understands the economy. There are consultants who will come and say this is exactly what we should be doing. So we don't have that capacity and capability to really see what are the reforms that are immediately required to get the house in order. So I believe IMF is a very good thing.
Madhushankar, Madhushankar, interestingly, I just went on the website www.treasury.gov.lk and went to the section which says Minister of Finance and Economic Stabilization and National Policies, and went to Department of Fiscal Policy. Now, the vision of the Department of Fiscal Policy is to ensure the establishment of a sustainable fiscal policy framework. Do we have a sustainable fiscal policy framework in Sri Lanka?
Yes, actually, Shamir, thank you very much for pointing out such a valid point here. So let me to explain the present situation or how we manage the fiscal policy. Then automatically we will get an answer whether it is sustainable or not. So in an overall, in a holistic view, if we take the total fiscal policy of the government, we can identify three main components of it. First section is the revenue generation part. Then secondly, the expenditure component. Then we all know if the income is not enough to cover up the expenditure, then we need to take certain loans or debts to cover up the remaining expenditure. So that is the holistic picture. I think that this can be understood by the general public very easily. So that is the three components of the total budget. So how we manage, if we take the previous era, we try to increase the expenditure of the country without any limit. We all explain what are those aspects. Now it is very clear, expenditure has been increased. So then how we manage, how we cover up that expenditure at that time? That means without increasing the income side, what we have done is we have easily go for the debt option. So that is how we manage the problem previously. That is how, as a person who studies these things, I am telling this. So that is how I evaluate the present fiscal policy of the government, the previous fiscal policy, expenditure and getting loans to cover up the expenditure. Then now we have come to a situation where we cannot take any more loans. Now it is, as I mentioned previously, now it has come to a situation where anyone, even a general person, can understand we are facing a debt problem. So that is how that debt problem arises, no any other reason. So that is the way, that is a very simple story. Then now what our people are saying, now yes, now there is a problem, everyone understand it. Now the people who manage the fiscal policy try to emphasize the general public. Now this is the case, we need to sacrifice. So then what is the option? Now you see, we don't have option, we have to increase the tax. Even the majority of the country now have realized, yes, that is the option. Otherwise how this government can survive, you know? So that is how we do that.
Sujiva, it's very unfair, isn't it? You spoke about the taxpayers' role and how the taxpayers should be aligned with the spending of the government as well, and ensure that whatever money that they're spending is for a good cause. And if you look at it, Shihar, for an example, we are now being taxed to up to 36% on our income. And where is this money being spent on? Isn't that something that the government should answer to the public?
Just to ask additionally, now if you see some countries like UK, they explain the people, the public, how they are taxed, plus how their tax money is spent and where it has gone, right? Which we don't see, and there is no transparency at all. And why should anybody pay tax?
And the highest tax level as far as the region is concerned,
exactly
36%. It's exorbitant.
Yeah. So a couple of questions. I'll give you a couple of short answers. Shamil, first for your one. Is it fair to tax Sri Lanka at 36%? I'll tell you what the rates are in this part of the region, leaving aside the developed countries. The developed countries are Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Take everyone else, right? I'm telling you the highest rates. Indonesia 30%, Bangladesh 25%, Malaysia 30%, Philippines 35%, Vietnam 35%, Cambodia 20%, Myanmar 25%, Singapore 22%, Hong Kong 15%, and Sri Lanka 36%. So we are a complete outlier. No two questions about it. India is only one because it has a surcharge tax, It goes up to about either 40 or 40, but that's for different reasons. So we are a complete outlier on personal tax at 36. That's your first question. Second one, on transparency of use of the spend. See, our biggest expenditure item is on public administration and provincial councils and so on. We spend about 900 billion, right?
Even higher than defense.
Even higher than defense. Then comes the finance ministry, which has a lot of allocations under that, which is about 600 billion, right?
Is it
Defense.
including the interest payment?
No, right? Defense is 532 billion, including police. It's a huge amount, Shami. Very few people are talking about this. We are 14 years since the end of the war, and we are an island nation. Imagine if we had borders with, say, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Our entire revenue would be on defense, nothing else. Now we are spending 532 billion, right? Higher than health, higher than education, right? So that's where the problem is. So is your question, you are willing to pay, Shamir, 36% taxes, but there is no reciprocity or accountability from the government to say, I'm also going to cut expenditure, because we need to minimize the budget deficit. We got to do it in two ways: increase revenue, minimize costs, so that our deficit starts coming down. If we think that we can just tax the people and tax exporters who are earning dollars at 30%, we can get out of this, I think we are highly mistaken. I think we need to seriously think about our strategy, and we are not going to get out of this rut by doing that, right? So that's why. So these exporters at 30%. Anyone who, for me, it's not only exporters. Anyone who is earning dollars. It can be tourism. It can be the IT guys, service exporters. It can be the merchandise exporters. It can be a firm like myself who is providing professional services to someone outside. Earn $100.
Mr. Mudalike, what are the potential buffers that are in place to mitigate external shocks?
We have hardly any, because we are completely exposed, right? See, I think just to a slightly deviation to what Ravi mentioned. See, people have got into this comfort zone saying that there are no queues. How did we eliminate the queues? We got 3.9 billion from India, right? For petrol and diesel and fuel. We got a World Bank loan, I think about $80 to $90 million.
For gas.
For gas. So we are borrowing in dollars, and we are consuming, and we are having a good time, and people have got into the comfort zone, and our economic freedom has been curtailed.
And now we're happy that
you want to go on a pilgrimage to Sri Mahabodhi. You have to make sure you go on a Saturday, on a Sunday and a Monday, so you can get 20 liters from this week and another 20 liters on Monday, and you can go and come. So your economic freedom has been curtailed. People don't realize this. You can't do what you want to do. You can't buy what you want.
No, but Ravi, just to speak on the reality of that, you give a couple of extra 100 rupees to the guy at the petrol pump, you can go. Just in case you didn't know.
Ravi, I want to ask you something now. You talked about change of governance. Now everybody is talking about reforms, right? Why aren't we talking about political reforms? Everybody agrees that there should be a change in politicians and the people who we send to parliament. But why it's not happening, and why it's not getting changed?
We can't do that by asking the set of rogues that are there in the parliament. We have to change the mindset of the people who are the ones who send these people to the parliament. So that is one of the critical important things that people should realize, to select the right people when they are voting next time. At some point in the future we'll see election. Whether it's provincial councils or general election, we need to select the right people. And I have even written in the papers, I don't know whether you have read, that the leaders of the political parties should have the right set of people, nominations should be given to the right set of people. I don't think they will do it, because they are only interested in winning the election or, getting into power. That's the only thing our political leaders are interested in.
What you're saying, seems to be very far-fetched. You're saying politicians should give nominations to individuals who have integrity. You say that it's important to ensure that at the next election we vote right. All that is well and good, and let's leave that aside because that is not the time to discuss about that even at this very moment of time. The point that we're discussing now is how do we ensure that we move forward with these set of rogues, as you mentioned in your own words, in the next few months, because that's what's crucial at this point of time, isn't it?
Yes, if we are to survive in the current context.
Because the president has very clearly said that he won't go for elections anytime soon.
Yeah, 2.5 years we may have to live with this. So in that context, we'll have to manage with the existing reforms that are proposed by other people. We know exactly what the reforms are required, but unfortunately we have to accept what the foreigners come and say, these are the reforms that you need. We'll have to accept it and do those reforms, which I believe we are going for the 17th time, which have been told even previously what we need to do, but never executed to the finality. So all this time, not done. So at least this time, we do it with everybody's consent, because we have no choice as well, other than the few people who come to the roads and make a huge shout, like the unions who are against privatization and so on. We can talk a lot about it, but the fact is, we have to do those reforms. No choice.
But Ravi, on this point of reforms, I think Minister Bandula Gunawardene recently made a statement. I think it's more effective if I quote him in the words that he used. He said, "Rate tiyena onama deyak vikunala dollar gain done," meaning we need to sell whatever we have in our country in order to bring back dollars. And he also went on to mention that our dollar reserves need to be somewhere about 3 billion for us to sustain ourselves in the short term. What do you think of this proposal that has been put forward?
Well, that is coming from the typical theory of a family who goes bankrupt, say Walau Karyo, and they have to sell the Walau, even the last bit of assets.
But the only thing is, this is not his Walau that he's selling.
He's selling the country. So that is the common man's concept. Monahara Vikunala Goden. But that's not the way to solve the crisis of this country, because we need much bigger reforms in order to, as we mentioned earlier, stop the leakage and the corruption. Because the bigger problem is the corruption, because what we spend, even the money we get from foreign donor agencies, multilateral agencies, has to be put into the productive and right use efficiently. Stop this leakage. If we continue to leak, however much we get, it will still go on.
But Ravi, now there's a singular saying, because Shalan spoke about Bandula Gunawardene's statement in Sinhalese. Nadut hamdure, badut hamdure. Habai Madua hamdura gineme. Madua is, it's people. The people are responsible. It's people who has to be held accountable at the end of the day, not a government minister who keeps rotating every 4 years and says that 2,500 rupees is sufficient for people to live a month.
But then, Shamir, it's the people who appoint him.
That's my point is, people who have appointed have now realized the mistake they did. So now it is next time, don't make that mistake. But in the short run, we have to accept what the foreigners come and tell us, do this, do this, do this.
But Ravi, now you were speaking about reform and how people should appoint the right people to represent them.
Right.
I think people have been told this for during my lifetime, at least as far as I remember, for somewhere around the last 15 years maybe. I'm pretty sure it would have been way more than that. Every year it's like, vote for the right people, vote for the right people. I remember even from our media network, we went on a campaign saying, vote right. And so on and so forth. But I'd like to direct this question to Madhushankar on public administration perspective when it comes to electing people, and for the people elected to have a proper mandate. The people must be in a stable state of mind, and that is not something that is available right now. Take, for example, one of the most basic issues that people are facing right now that is on the rise, which is crime. People are breaking into houses across the country. There have been instances where people have been intimidated. Most recent incident, the reason I'm bringing this up was yesterday in front of my house, there was an incident like this where people were intimidated with a sword. This random two guys on a bike coming with a sword to steal things from people at about 8 o'clock in the night. This is a very busy junction. So against such a backdrop, do you think that this whole thing that we've been speaking of for the past 20, 30 maybe years that Ravi also pointed out, where we should elect the correct people into power. Do you think that is possible?
So actually, it's a very serious question. Serious means when it comes to theoretical perspective and when it comes to practicality of the country. So in order to answer that question, we need to understand the nature of the thinking pattern of our people. So that is the most important challenge we have facing as a country. The thing is, majority of the people are not rational enough. So when it comes to their election or political decisions, so that is the main point. That means they are highly emotional, and they like to live with their political parties. If they vote for a political leader, if he maybe if something happen, maybe damaging his personality, then those the people who yes that is the case. They are ready to defend all the injustice or all the malpractices done by the politicians.
Sujiva, Ravi, you both spoke about corruption, and you also spoke about corruption. Now, when you define corruption, we always go for government corruption. But for corruption, you need two parties. And I would say private sector is the biggest corrupt sector in the country, right? So why aren't you all talking about this? And there is no reforms or no decisions from the private sector to end this corruption, to curb this corruption. So how can you all talk about corruption, like this?
So I'll give you a very short answer on this. See, for me, your media organization has been fighting on bribery and corruption for a long period of time, right? So you can never tackle it if you don't strengthen the three institutions which I mentioned to you. The public prosecutor is absolutely key. That is the Attorney General's department. Right? Number one, you got to strengthen. Then you got to make sure. Today what's happening is white collar crimes. Has the police department got the skill sets to tackle white collar crime? You need bankers, you need forensic guys, you need IT experts, you need all these kinds of skill sets, right? So you need to strengthen the police department and also the judiciary. So if
but Ravi, are you saying that they don't have the resources or the will? Which is
in my view, it's both. It's both. I'll tell you, and then to answer your question specifically on the private sector, what are the reasons for corruption? Is that when you make a system complicated, it's one of the biggest reasons. Take for example customs. I'll give you a simple example. Say if you say everything you import, doesn't matter what you import as long as it's not illegal. Say you pay 20% duty. Then what do you need? What do you require? You don't need people. You need actually scanners to make sure you don't import illegal stuff. That's all you require. And that is something what countries like Georgia has done, I'll come back to it later, is that you make the system simple. What have they done on income tax? You asked Shamir on income tax. Everyone, corporate tax is 15%. Doesn't matter whether what type of service you do. Everyone pays 15%. You've removed the exemption, the so-called deductions. When you want these deductions, only you need to get hold of people. Can I put this line item under this particular one because I can deduct? Say advertising, say entertainment, say foreign travel, say research and development, say whatever. So you want to see, can I deduct this? You take the deductions off. Personal tax, everyone pays 20%. Highest rate is 20%. And Shamir, within 3 to 4 years, they have increased the tax revenue 2.5 times. With the lowest rates, everyone pays taxes.
So we're getting some questions on our number 071 558 7788. I want to pose a question to Rohanta. Ravi was talking about corruption. Sujiva was just talking about corruption as well. Instead of selling valuable assets, why do we take back the monies from these politicians who have amassed untold wealth? Let them explain how they got this wealth. Only after having come into government, they should explain it to the people who elected them, don't they? Rohanta?
I mean, everybody says this, Samir, but it never happens. You know, my view is that we can always, keep on, preaching about this, saying, why don't we look at the people who have taken cash, who have cases in the AGs? How come these cases keep getting postponed for 5 years? Which have been filed. So, but it's not happening. So, the way I feel is that, the reforms have to happen from us. If you are saying that you have state enterprises which are bleeding, I mean, why can't private sector, 10 top CEOs say, I'm going to take over these SOEs and turn it around? I mean, I did it.
Are you serious?
Shamir,
Let's talk a look at Sri Lankan Airlines. Who's going to even touch Sri Lankan Airlines?
Shamir, I took
Tell
over.
me which CEO with a rightful mind would touch Sri Lankan Airlines at this very moment of time? Rohanta, tell me.
Okay.
You're talking about the top 10 CEOs. Tell me which CEO with a rightful mind would touch Sri Lankan Airlines with that P&L?
See, for instance, I took over Lanka Satusa, which was making 2 billion loss. So first thing I did.
Classic example. You didn't stay for Satusa for your entire tenure. You left.
Yes, but hear me out. What did I do first? I said I want private sector people on the board.
Yeah, but that's
right?
different. Rohanta, you tried to reform
No,
and you couldn't do it.
No, my question, Shamir, is that within 6 months, we had a CEO from a top multinational who came in. We got a best guy from blue chip company.
How long did that reform last?
Within 7 months, we turned it around to a 60 million operating profit.
How long did the reform last?
So my question
How
is...
sustainable was that? What is Satsa doing right now? What is their P&L at this very moment of time?
So
losses after losses. We are providing, as an export company, we are doing a lot of work with these companies and they are not paying our monies back.
So my point, what I'm trying to say...
Their cash flows are negative.
So the point I'm answering your question, Shamir.
Which CEO with a rightful mind would touch a state-owned enterprise at this very moment with that P&L?
So that's what I'm saying, Shamir, is that the reform has to happen from us. Now, for example, I can only tell you what we did, not what we are going to do. Once we got the private sector people on board and we realized that we managed our expenditure and we just made sure there was no pilferage. And we got the private sector to invest on Satosa in terms of bringing their product in. And then within 7 months, you had a 60 million profit. Now, this went on for 1.5 years. Then what happened? You had interference coming, large tenders, to be given because it's profitable. What did we do as a team? We said, guys, we are not going to get involved. And we just took a piece of paper, signed. And I remember I just took a trishaw and I said, I'm going home in a trishaw. I'm not even taking the company vehicle. Now, my point is that at that moment of time, if the head of state came in and said, guys, here is a set of people who are private sector driven, who has turned around a loss-making entity, then similar could have happened to the rest of the organization.
Rohanta, from where did you get the tenders? Where did the influence come from, if you can reveal?
No, I mean, very simple. It was a ERP tender for about 750 million, right, where the process was followed. And then you had a guy who was coming in and saying, guys, give it to this fellow who happens to be a PETA trader. I don't think he even know how to spell ERP, right? So, but then our board was writers. So what did they say? We got together and said, guys, we are not getting involved in this. So now...
So what was this? Was this an order that you cannot disregard as the board, saying, no, we're not going to take this, we're not going to do this?
You have to go there,
Yeah.
which we did.
Which all did at the end of the day.
So the point is that we have to be the example in today's world.
The point that everyone is making, I think Sujiva, Ravi, Madhushankar, is the fact that sustainability has to be there. Whatever reforms are brought in, it has to be sustainable. Now you say, Rohanta, you were there 6-7 months down the line, you made it profitable, well and good. That's a good example. That means the private sector can run operations, and that is not something that the government should be chartered into. Very well understood. But was that change sustainable?
Shamir, we have a golden opportunity now because you are paying 36% of your tax. Okay? This has never happened. This has never happened before. See guys, all this time, we know there was leakage in the public sector, but no one can say, hey guys, that's my money. Here is a situation where either you have to print the money to pay the public sector every another month, or otherwise you have to tax. That's why they're taxing 36%. Now, the white collar has to put pressure on the system and say, guys, can you see this? That corruption is happening because of my money. Now, if we don't bring this kind of behavior, we can preach about IMF, we can preach about what others have to do. What's the point, Shyam?
But even IMF has very clearly articulated that Sri Lanka should be corruption-free if the money needs to come in, that 2.7 billion.
And for your information, this 2.9 billion happens to be the lowest in the IMF. If you take Greece and all the other countries, it's 30 billion. You know, so they have put a stipulation in. But I think the reform has to come from us, Shamir, not from others.
But Sujiva, when you speak about the pressure put on these state institutions, now that their salaries are paid by people like Shamir who pay the tax 36%.
Trust me,
He's counting his 36%.
you will also have to pay something if you're earning more than 100,000
You will be paying from other things.
Yeah, other things.
Other things.
So don't think that you are
from the
free
general
from
public,
it yet.
from the general
What's
public.
your question?
All of Sujiva, Ravi and all of us are in the, you know, a chopping board at the moment.
So, Sujiva, the point I was trying to make is this pressure that you think that the leaders of our country need to put on the public sector employees now that their salaries are paid by the tax paid by the general public. When do you think that will kick in? Because, I mean, as of now, I can point blank tell you, because I also work with a lot of public sector employees, and then the situation is pretty much the same. Even recently, take for example, I think this was highlighted before, the efficiency of our police force. There was a theft that happened in the middle of the night. It was high-end camera equipment worth about 1.5 million rupees. However, when the bag was stolen, there was a AirPod set which had a tracker on. So these people, they went to the cops and they were like, hey, the tracker is on, we can see where he is. And the cops right there, then and there, were like, no, we don't have our OIC today, you'll have to come tomorrow morning. And then incidentally, somehow it was caught because the man had swiped the debit card at a shop and his face was identified. But the point being is, it's that inefficient. When do you think this efficiency will start kicking in?
Shalan, see, one thing that we have to understand is that we just look at the public sector and we can't just put a brush stick saying everybody is corrupt. You know?
I said inefficient.
Yeah.
Not corrupt.
So, no, I'm saying corruption and inefficiency. You see, if you look at, we look at the public sector in terms of Sri Lanka police or the Sri Lanka customs, you know, the different touch points, and we give a general understanding. But if you really work with the real public sector of Sri Lanka, you know, you find that 80-85% of them are hardworking, they are conscious of what they do. It's just that they want strong leadership. I mean, end of the day, who is this public sector? These are the people who come from the university setup, right? Who are first-class honors graduates, cream of Sri Lanka. They their work ethic is very good. It's just that they want leadership, which is strong. I mean, we have been chairmen of tourism, chairmen of export development board. How come people were so enthusiastic that they would work on a Sunday? They would work on a Saturday and a Sunday. Why is that? Because if they feel that the top is honest, they are prepared to work. So that's something that we have to say, that the private sector must say, I'm prepared to sit in the public sector and give that leadership.
Mr.
You know, without.
Do you feel as though downgrading by international agencies like Fitch recently, do you feel like it affects our process with loan procurement with, you know, all these international multilateral organizations?
So basically what has happened to us is that, I mean, this downgrading happened over a period of time, right? And we just ignored it. And as soon as that happens, I mean, the international markets are no longer approachable. Simple story is that. You get your rating, it's like, Shania, you have your name included in the crib. You go to a bank, the bank will say, sorry, I can't give you any type of loan. So that's what has happened to us, right? That's
but the
number one.
assurances by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka at the time, I believe they refuted all of the downgrading. Every time Fitch or Moody's downgrades Sri Lanka's credit rating, the Central Bank puts out a release back in the day, not under the current governor, saying that no, we don't agree with this. This is what happened. Quite a long release.
Not in the latest case.
Not in the latest.
Not in the latest case.
No, way back. So those have no effect.
No,
It's unrealistic to dispute it now.
It's very difficult because these are independent agencies, right? And they are trained and they do this globally, right? We are just one out of 200 countries that they rate, right? So the international debt. So I mean, there's no chance of disputing it. So that's number one. So then what happens? So then you have to limit yourself to either bilateral debt or multilateral debt,
Yep.
right? Because the international debt markets are closed. Right? And then what happens when you go and say that you are bankrupt? Only the multilateral agencies like World Bank, AIIB, ADB and so on, I mean, they may look at it from a sympathetic view and say, look, these guys are going hungry. I think as Rohantha mentioned, poverty is a serious issue. Right? So they may step in. But the bilateral creditors will again say, look, you guys are not going to pay us. I mean, see, we need to understand, right? Our debt is not sustainable at this point. There's no way that at
So
the
what's
current
the
level.
contingency plan?
Yeah, so the issue is this: it's both types of debt. So we talk only about the dollar debt. It's our rupee debt is not sustainable at this stage. We have far too much rupee debt.
So we might
Right.
even go into a banking crisis in Sri Lanka if the situation is not addressed.
So you're spot on. So I think that's why even President Wickremesinghe mentioned at the economic summit, banking sector has to be protected at any cost. At any cost, the banking sector has to be protected.
Even by printing money?
By whatever means. If it is printing money, yes, we need to print money.
A classic example, Sujeev, is Lebanon. Overnight, the banking sector decided not to pay their savings account holders any of the money.
Correct.
And that may be the predicament in Sri Lanka in the future if the situation is not arrested.
Absolutely spot on. So in Lebanon, what happens? Say you have a fixed deposit of $1 million or a savings account. The bank is saying, I'm not giving it to you.
Even savings accounts.
Yeah, even savings account. You
Nothing.
can't withdraw.
Nothing. You can't
The
withdraw.
ATM machines are closed.
Yeah.
So you can't withdraw. So simple as, so that is why President Wickremesinghe said 2 days ago, the banking sector has to be protected at any cost in my view.
Yeah.
And at the moment, they are under stress. I'll give you just one simple statistic. For the first 9 months, January to September, right? The 9 private banks plus the 2 state banks, 350 billion rupees is the provisioning that they have done for impairment losses. So impairments is the bad loans and the bad investments. And the bad investments covers the sovereign debt and the bad loans are what you and I have borrowed. Right? 360 billion is the amount. That is the amount that has gone out from the capital of the banks. And the capital is key for them to lend. If they have no capital, they can't lend. Right? So that is why today you go to a bank, it's difficult to borrow rupees. Forget about borrowing in dollars. They will say, sorry, even though your overdraft has been approved, but we are not releasing the money. Right? Because there's a huge impact. Because when the economy is contracting, you are going to end up at negative 9%. Right? Negative 9%. Right? So that means the economy is not growing. So say if Shalan has borrowed, he is going to go and say, I can't pay. Can you restructure my loan? Shamir will go and say, look, my markets are not doing well in Europe because they are getting into a recession. I need some more time. Can you give me a moratorium? Can you give me some time where I don't have to pay anything at all? Can you extend the loan period? So that's the impact so far.
Right. So Sujiva, I just saw recently the former governor of the central bank, Ajit Nibat Kabra, speaking to the media, especially on this program call, which is hosted by Vasanta from Sirasa. He's saying that if he was the governor, he wouldn't have declared bankruptcy and would have continued to pay the ISBs that were overdue. Is that something that could be taken into consideration looking back at what has happened and looking at the future?
Yeah.
Right
So
now?
Shami, the problem is this. As soon as you declare bankruptcy, you get into a spin. You get into a spin, right? Because you can't borrow from anyone. everyone will look at you and saying, this guy, keep your distance. Because he's not going to pay you. He has said he can't pay you. Officially, we have said we can't pay you, right? So when you take that stand, a huge amount of repercussions. And I hope when we took that stand, we looked into all these possible eventualities that can happen, right? What could happen is, say when a foreign investor want to come here, right?
They wouldn't come.
So the first question they will ask is, I'm willing to put $100 million here. Can I take my money back when I want? First question is that's what they're going to ask. And when you say we have no dollars, then he will think again, right? I need to be careful here. I may still invest, but I need to have so many safeguards. So that's the issue. So when you make, it's like an individual, it's like a company. A company who goes and tell you a banker, sorry, I can't pay you. I'm in serious trouble.
But Sujeeva, now that's the default payment, and the fact that foreign investors are looking at us in that view is not only, it's not a new thing. Even in the past, a foreign investor looking at Sri Lanka, they'll be like, okay, if I invest 100 million, and if there is a matter that's pending in courts, how long will it take? It'll take me 4 years to recover my money, and that is also not guaranteed because there is a lack of faith in how matters are handled. As far as legal concerns are.
Yeah. So you're spot on. So that is why when it comes to foreign direct investment, I'll give you an unbelievable statistic. For the first time, the agency that they started was in 1977 called the Greater Colombo Economic Commission. Upali Vijayawardena was the first chairman. 1977, well before all of you were born, right? That is how many? 45 years ago. You know how much FDIs we have got?
About 20 billion?
19 billion. 45 years. Shami,
I think Bangladesh got that in a year.
We need to be ashamed.
Look at Vietnam for an
Look at Vietnam, right? We have got 19 billion over 45 years. I mean, it's shocking.
Sujeeva, what do you think about the current?
So then the question comes in, why is it that we cannot track?
And Sujeeva, the biggest problem right now is with these taxes that the government is imposing on export companies are going outside and establishing shop.
Yeah.
Now, I know one of the tea companies in Sri Lanka, they went and opened office in Dubai.
Yeah.
And that means the money that is supposed to come to Sri Lanka won't come in because they will be reinvesting that money in the operations in Dubai, Rohan. Don't you think so? And we have a big problem, not in the short term, but in the long term, medium term. People who have money in Sri Lanka are going and investing in other countries on JVs or FDIs and benefiting those countries in return, and we are losing money and grip. Yeah. Don't you think so?
In a very big way.
Shamir, your point. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Rohan, yes, both of you, yes. Okay. Let's start off with Rohan and then switch to Ravi. Yeah.
See, Shamir, this is why I'm saying is that, there's no point, us writing to the papers and discussing. There should be people who will go up to right now the head of state and say, guys, why is it that your only way of income is taxing us? 60% of the income of Sri Lanka is going to be through tax. And you're taxing the exporter, right, very rightly you said, and they are going to Ghana. I know all the biscuit companies, most of the companies are set up in Sri Lanka. So my question is that these financial experts, why is it that they can't go and talk to these presidents with the chambers and say, isn't there a better way to earn money than only taxing people? I mean, the ICT sector went up. They fought and they made sure that any dollar income that they get is not taxed now.
With your permission, Rohan, can I pose a question, Sujeeva, because you play an active role, Sujeeva, fortunately, unfortunately, at the chambers. So this point of the chamber not playing an active role is completely directed at you as far as this roundtable discussion is concerned. So do you want to respond to that, Sujeeva?
Yeah, so see, the problem is this, right? See, when you're representing the private sector, under the way our economy is run, you are generally scared. You can be targeted. Right? So that is why private sector as a whole, it's not just the chain, private sector as a whole, in my view, is definitely responsible to the current situation as well.
But Rohan has a point, Sujeeva, don't you think so? Because the chamber is the voice of the private sector, right, Rohantha? Now, if you take a look at the National Chamber for an example, the National Chamber has to represent the private sector companies who have obtained membership from them. And if they are silent, what else?
I mean, for example, if you take the tax increase that came last week, not one chamber came and said, guys, what's happening when you put a 70% increase? Your whole tourism industry is going to crash. I mean, if you look at the top tourism country the company right now, analyze the data. I'm not a financial wizard. If you analyze the last 5 years, if you look at the ROCE, happens to be at minus. Why? Because even now we are shouting about 1 billion rupees that we have earned from 600,000 tourists that has come. How much is it? $166,000 per person, right? I mean, what are we talking about? How can you run a current operation with the current structure of the expenditure on this? So again, the question comes about Shamir saying, what is the reform? Reform is not huge. Reform starts from us. The first reform is that we need to have a global marketing campaign. For the last 14 years, we are trying to do that.
So Harin Fernand is not doing a good job,
no,
in your opinion?
That is not the point. That is not the point. Shamir, that's not the point.
You also in the board of tourism.
Shamir, this is not personality driven. This is about the organization of terms of Sri Lanka, right? The Sri Lanka as a brand must say, hey guys, I'm allocating ₹1 billion for tourism. You know, do a global marketing campaign, which is the first reform. First reform. You can't blame personalities. The whole structure must say, I'm allocating this money.
But Minister Harin Fernand is going from country to country, saying come to Sri Lanka, visit Sri Lanka, all
he's doing a good job. Shamir, he's doing a damn good job, Shamir. But the question is that you need an umbrella strategy, just like Nepal, just like what Maldives is doing, where you have an integrated campaign. If you don't have an integrated campaign to convince people, you don't get that share of voice.
Now look at the tea industry for an example. I think Sujiva can answer, Ravi can answer, Madhushan can answer. We, as a country, we came up with a plan to have a global campaign for Sri Lankan tea.
Yeah.
Do you know the crop loss for this year alone? 50 million kgs thus far.
Yeah, 20%.
And what are we talking about? Are we talking about a global campaign when we are not even liberating the tea industry in the country?
Shamir, if I just come in there, now again you're asking reforms. No, I'm again not looking at huge reforms. The first reform I'm looking, because I sat on the 10-man committee to evaluate private sector of the tea industry. See, you need to have a contract for at least 50 to 53 years, so that at least a tea cycle takes 7 years once you plant. At least you allow 2 cycles for you to get the return. Now the question is that reform, now that's why I'm attacking this reform story, saying that you don't have reform. Reform is possible. First of all, give the private sector 53-year or 60 years window of a contract, so that they will start replanting, because the tea stock in the private sector, 80% is over 60 years. Now, the point you mentioned is only the what you see as a repercussion, but the reform that is required is to change the policy. So if that policy is not reformed, the tea industry will not invest.
But let's not forget, Rohantha, the tea industry in Sri Lanka is boasting of a history of 151 years now.
Yeah.
It's a very significant time frame, and we have the most efficient tea auction system in the world.
Yeah.
And we've done all that.
Yeah.
But how much are we gaining? $1.5 billion, $2 billion. But this actually should be a $3 billion industry.
Shamir.
And because of the whim and fancy of several individuals in the industry alone, we have not been able to liberalize the country's tea industry. If we liberalize this, if we brought in orthodox teas, if we brought in unorthodox teas, if we blend in Sri Lanka and repack and send overseas, look at the market that we are tapping.
I agree 100%.
It's a $22 billion market.
Shamir.
And we have only $2 billion. And what are we talking about?
Shamir, you're talking about the tea hub, right? Agree 100% with you, because the global consumer has been proven through research is not going in Australia, in the US and saying, I want Ceylon tea. They just want a beverage. And you have to bring in those teas to bring the mixture in. Now the question is, if somebody says there is no reform, why can't that reform be taken now, so that 1.5 billion industry can be 3 billion?
I'd also like to answer some of the questions. One is this chambers and why the private sector is not taking up. There is a lot of effort being put in, particularly on the corruption, of zero corruption practices being brought into the corporates in governance. And I have asked these companies, which we are doing some judging, where what are the practices they have to ensure not only in the company but all the suppliers also follow these anti-corruption methods. So there is an effort which is happening because there is a giver and a taker. But I think more corruption is happening not only in Sri Lanka but when it comes to so-called infrastructure projects that are funded by you know who. So I don't want to mention names, but
Funded
it is
by who?
obviously you know who China. So that is where the biggest corruption happens. So the money comes from those so-called countries with not ADB or World Bank, which has all the practices to ensure the money is spent properly. When it comes to this type of money, it goes into various people. So
but then Ravi, are you saying that the lender is responsible and not the borrower?
The borrower gets the money, but a part of it goes into the people who are involved in the project. This is where the problem is. That is why
So is that the issue? Should the lender be blamed for that?
Obviously, lender has to ensure they don't give anything. That is what I am also talking. Even in the local context, corporates are adopting practices for zero corruption.
So we have a question from one of our viewers, Ravi.
Yeah.
Now all of you are emphasizing that the right people must be appointed to the parliament. Look at the composition of the parliament today. A majority of them either have no people's mandate, including the president. Majority of them being from the national list. Either they jump from one side to another, and shouldn't reforms start and priorities should be given before elections on these matters?
Absolutely, yes. That is what I am proposing, that reforms has to start where the public, before we talk about tea reforms or tourism reforms, we have to get the governance structure of the country right, which means pressurizing the politicians, particularly the party leaders, to nominate the right people. If they nominate right people, people will vote. Doesn't matter whatever the party, but at least the people who come forward are able to, command respect from the people
Yes,
to vote.
Yeah.
I think from that perspective, as a general in holistic view, we as citizens need to question the role of the government. At the moment now, if we go back to the previous situations, now there's a concept in this literature called rowing a boat. The role of the government we consider at the earlier time, it's like rowing a boat. But later it has changed as steering a boat. Steering a boat means only setting the direction, no manpower is needed, role of the government. But in modern view, that is not even steering a boat, that is only serving the nation. So that should be the modern role of the government. I think as a citizens, at the private sector and everyone, we should question the role of the government.
I think that gives a kind of an important point where about the privatization, right? Everybody hates privatization. Most of Sri Lankans hate privatization because of the perception, through media and what the successive governments have created. To what extent the privatization can help Sri Lanka to get rid of this current economic crisis, and how sustainably we can do this, right? Now we have a successful model of SLT, Sri Lanka Telecom, right? And we also had Sri Lankan Airlines from 1997 to 2008, right, until they wrap up the agreement, right?
President Mahinda Rajapaksa was not given a flight from London to Colombo.
So it was terminated.
So why? I mean, why?
Actually, you are asking a very good question, and I recently heard all about Kalni Tires, which was also highly unionized company owned by the government, which became SEAT, which is now Indian owned.
Thai Corporation.
Earlier Thai Corporation.
Exactly.
What a change that has happened there. They are practically producing all the tires required for Sri Lanka and also exporting. So why this change happened is because they brought in the right technology from Switzerland, Germany, all this, new radial technology which is required, and adapted the best practices from Michelin, and also adapted all the global governance practices. I was talking to them directly, and I was so surprised to hear government set up now change. So it is the management that is required for these SOEs, not really ownership. You know, it can be owned by the government, it can be owned by the private sector, but ultimately you should have the right set of people in the top who are not corrupt and not allowing any of the corrupt practices. I asked them, now how are you supplying the CTB tires? Are you paying any bribes for them? Not a cent, because it's cheaper. There is no alternative for CTB.
And there were a lot of success stories.
Exactly.
Take a look at Shell and gas, for example.
Yeah.
It's a successful
so
story.
I think, Shami, the problem is this. People in this country haven't understood what privatization is, right? See, privatization can be, one example is what Ravi mentioned about. Tire corporation being completely sold, right? That's one type of privatization. Second type of privatization is like Sri Lanka Telecom. Government keeps a majority share, but brings in a technical partner with an equity stake to run the place. Right? So that's a different type of privatization. Government is still the majority owner here. The third thing could be unbundling, right? CEB, you don't privatize, but you simply unbundle, generation, transmission and distribution into
several sectors.
Yeah, you just unbundle, but that's also privatization, right? Then you could have things like making sure the regulatory aspect is brought in. It's like saying Sri Lanka Ports Authority. Now see, there's a direct conflict there. No? Sri Lanka Ports Authority is the port regulator, but it runs Jaya Container Terminal. And then you are competing, Jaya is containing with SAGT and the Chinese term. I mean, it's chaotic. How can that happen? Government can't be the regulator, and then you run a terminal and you compete with.
But now the problem is.
So there are so many different types of privatization that needs to be done.
Now the government wants to, example, sell Sri Lankan Airlines.
Correct.
There are no takers.
No, don't say that. There may be takers.
There may be takers.
There may be takers as long as. See, you need to dress the bride first, no? You can't, if you ask me right now.
Like Madhusha says, decorating the.
Decorate it, right? Decorate it. You have to dress the bride. As it stands now, with almost close upon $1 billion of debt, you can't, no one will buy. I am fully with you on that, right? See what happened to Air India 1 year ago. Tata's bought it. But when Indian government did that, part of the debt was taken into the central government balance sheet, saying you don't have to take the full debt. So that's dressing up the bride, right? See,
but the number of employees?
Yeah, it's too much. See, if you ask me, they have 25 aircrafts. They have 7,000 staff. That is about 300 per aircraft. There are airlines which runs it 150, 160, right? So I'll give you, spot on. I'll give you another example. Take the two terminals. See, in Sri Lanka, we have 3 big container terminals. No? SAGT, which is run by Maersk and John Keel's runs it. Then you have the Jaya Container Terminal. Then you have the Chinese terminal. All 3 of them handle about 2.5 million TEUs annually. We have about 7.58 million TEUs is what we handle. Roughly somewhere around there. They're all between 2 and 3. Ports Authority, 9,000 employees. CICT, just over 1,000. So that's the difference. I'll give you another example. Take his university, Sri Jawadanpur University, right? 12,000 employees. NSBM Green University, 12,000 employees. Sri Jawadanpur has 2,000 non-academic.
2,000 non-academic?
2,000 non-academic.
You mean 12,000 students?
For the 12,000 students, there are 2,000 non-academic. For every 6 students, there's 1 non-academic.
Sure about the number.
Right?
Okay.
I'm telling you with authority, with responsibility. NSBM runs with 100. That's the government owned.
And a profitable venture also.
Very profitable. So that's the difference. So you can see the port 1,000 to 9,000. Here 100 to 2,000, 20 times more. So I mean, this is the case with the reason is, that's why I told you no one wants reform, because if the politicians say raise their hands up for reforms, they can't go back to the electorate. You go and see couple of months ago, because of Corona, they had to provide public transport. You go in front of some of these the monsters, what we call the state enterprises. You go and see where those buses are heading to. You know who the ministers were, because they are going to those electorates.
Or probably from the airport back to Hambantota.
No, you go to CEB, you will know who the energy ministers were. Because all those buses are going to where the energy ministers came from.
So
Simple
each
story.
minister that was in charge of petroleum has put in hundreds of
The
people.
biggest question mark now is, with this whole system, I'll give you 1 minute each to each speaker, which the current state of affairs in Sri Lanka, can we resurrect the country's economy? If so, how? Let me start with you, Sujiva.
See, you need a deep reform process. Tightening the belt will not work. And we have to understand that. Why? We are a bankrupt nation and our economy cannot be resurrected. I am just repeating President Vikram Singh, right? So what do you need to do? I'll give you a simple example. I met up with the finance minister, former finance minister of Georgia. They said corruption was a huge issue.
And he's very young. He became the minister
He became
of,
finance
foreign-
minister at 32,
at
economic minister at 30, finance minister at 32. He said, he gave an example of the police. Is that a traffic police was corrupt? I was wondering whether I was living in Georgia or whether I was living in Sri Lanka. Yeah, we have the same issues here. You know what they did? Overnight, they terminated the traffic police. They completely took off that unit. There's no traffic police. They're corrupt. Are we willing to do those kind of deep reforms? I'm asking you, if you don't do that, and they said for SOE restructuring, they were all overstaffed. And they terminated the employees without paying any compensation. And this finance minister told me, it is far better for them to be on the road than being within the public sector. Because you will be hemorrhaging if you keep them there. You tackle them, you take them onto the road and you tackle them. If you ask me, Shamir, right, I'll give you a simple example. Public Administration Secretary Mr. Mayaduna recently said there are 100,000 people out of the 1.5 million public sector workforce who have no work. No work. They come in the mornings, 100,000 people, they have no work. 100,000 people into 30,000 rupees a month, Shamir, Chalan and Shania. It will cost us 36 billion a year if we are to maintain the, we say you don't come to work anymore. 100,000 people, because they have no work. You stay at home, reskill yourself, or try to find a job. We are going to pay you 1 year salary. Stay at home. 100,000 people. And it's going to cost us 36 billion.
And
the 36 billion is nothing. If you tell the people, I am going to increase your VAT from 15 to 17, because I am going to charge you 2% to pay for this 100,000 people to stay them at home. 30,000 rupees a month for 12 months. People will pay that. But do we have leaders who will do reforms of that nature? In my view, no. That's where the problem is.
And you spoke about Georgia, for an example, Sujiva. In 2007, the World Bank named Georgia the world's #1 economic reformer and has consistently ranked the country as the top of its ease of doing business index. And they've done
Shamir,
those reforms.
They were 100 plus. They were like us. 100 plus in the ease of doing business. You know what they're ranking today? 13. That is because they had finance ministers, they had heads of states, and they had a small cabinet of 12 people.
Now you're saying
13.
Very interesting. So you say that the Minister of Finance that you met in Georgia was 32 years old. Look at the cabinet in Sri Lanka. The head of state is 75 years old. Look at the ministers who are there.
And the bloated cabinet.
Look at
they
the
had 12.
parliament.
So, Jiva, the finance minister of Georgia, how many brains did he have?
No, but out of jokes. But do you think we need someone who's young, energetic, enthusiastic about the country, who can steer the country, just like Georgia, for an example?
No doubt about it. No, if we can't meet the aspirations of the young, right? I mean, I'm telling you, in my view, we just can't get out of this current problem. We can do some kind of, patchwork. It's not sustainable. You'll always been asking, is it a sustainable solution? It will not be sustainable.
Yeah. So let's pick Madhushankar's brain on
Yes.
the way forward.
Actually, when it comes to our approach, now even we all have came into a point where now privatization is kind of an option. So actually my point of view is the same thing, but the way we look at this privatization concept is not the accurate or the proper way to take the problem into action. So why I am saying that is, when it comes to privatization, especially the citizens of the country need to understand this. What is privatization? So even he has previously mentioned, I'm going to explain the same thing in a different perspective. That is, now what is government owned? What is the government? Then we can say that is the representatives of the people. That means again the politicians. The government owned. Then what they are doing with that ownership? So they are interfering to the recruitment, and they are getting, they are using those organizations for the political campaigns. So that is what we are doing when those organizations are owned by the government. Is it to the public interest? Is it to increase the public interest? The general public in this country need to ask this question. So what is happening at the moment when those organizations are owned by the government? Then what is privatization? So we are going to transfer the ownership for the general public. Who are general public? You and me. If you have some amount of savings, you can invest in an organization, then you can participate for the decision making of that country.
But what the government says is you won't get the subsidies, you won't get the fuel subsidies, the power subsidies, as and when you need them, you won't get it. That's what they say.
Why is that? The reason is, it has high studies in the literature. These organizations are intentionally keeping the government. Why? The reason is, even I have cited previously, when these products, the products offered by state-owned enterprises are highly politically sensitive products, or in other way, politically marketable products. How we can do it? When election is closer, they can reduce, if they can, now when it is run by the government, they have that power. So they can reduce price as a larger amount. Ultimately, the organization will make a loss, but it will again transfer for the general public, but they can win the election.
So I'm getting comments from the public as well. Before I move on to Ravi to ask the way forward. We were saying all these professionals who are present today should get together and form a professional party and represent at the next election. Find people to work at the grassroots levels. We must make the change now. I am sure you all can lead. So Ravi, what are your thoughts on this?
Very true. Actually, that is the fault of professionals like me. We let the government run the show and run our own businesses, or didn't get involved. And that's the repercussions we are facing now. All our children are trying to get out of this country. Brain drain has happened already. And companies are also setting up outside this country because they have seen this is a failed nation.
Why is it that professionals don't like to enter politics?
I think it is a cesspit.
That's a vicious cycle of corruption.
So you don't want to jump into a cesspit. I don't think any of you want to do it. So that's the issue. So when there is a cesspit, it's so disgusting and so bad. Now, to answer some of the questions, I would say we need political literacy among our people. We have brought some concept about socialism from all Oxford College people and planted in our people who think anything state-owned is God-sent. It's our Desiya Sampat. Now we have even sold the country to foreign, taken such amount of debt. We are in a debt trap. We have sold the country also. So, this whole concepts of what people are living will have to change. If we as Madhushankar very clearly said, we have to change the whole system and change the mindsets of people that there is nothing called state-owned. What matters is ultimately the public benefiting from these institutions and not being used by politicians and their stooges for their own benefit.
So I want to come to Rohantha, but we are getting some questions from our viewers on the number 071 558 7788. Besides selling the family silver, that is talking about privatizing Sri Lanka state-owned enterprises to fund current ongoing expenses, is there any sustainable plan how to pay back the approximately $50 billion of old outstanding debts?
This 50 billion is a peanut. It's not a big amount of money. Some of these rich people in the world have more money and they will spend that in various purposes.
Must spend 43 billion
Exactly.
dollars on
So we
Twitter.
can recover very easily if we stem all the corruption and the leaks that are happening. 50 billion is such a small amount. We can turn this country very easily. It is that professionalism you need in running the government and adopting the right practices, right reforms. Some may be long term, some may be short term, but you need to have that right set of people at the right place.
Rand, what are your thoughts? What is the way forward? Now we're talking about problems, but let's look at the solutions. What are your thoughts? Now I know you've been heading Satosa for some time. You were the head of EDB for a few years. You were the head of Sri Lanka tourism for a few years as well. In your opinion, what must we do to resurrect the country's economy now?
Shamil, I mean, we come from a marketing background, we worked for multinationals for about 15 years before we took these kinds of roles. So our basis is there are things you can control, there are things you cannot control. And we know the things we cannot control right now. If we go for radical reform, it's only a piece of paper. We can't do it, we know that. We know the structure of the political thing we can discuss here around this table, but it's not going to work. So to me, I want to earn $10 billion to Sri Lanka in the next 12 months.
On what terms? Right?
Number
which
one.
sector?
Number
Which
one.
sector?
Number
Let me
one.
get from which sector?
Number one, the point you mentioned, Shamir, tea industry. You are expert in tea, okay? All we have to do is to bring in the tea hub concept to reform, increase the private sector privatization contracts to 63 years, you will get your 3 billion.
Eyes
Very
closed.
simple, and you know what I'm talking about. Number two, if you look at tourism, I mean, the team is currently doing a fantastic job to get you 1 billion with 6 lakhs. Okay, with all the issues in the country, in the world, where people are actually not wanting to come to Sri Lanka because they don't know. One reform, an integrated marketing campaign. For the last 10 years we have been trying, and it's a success model in Nepal, in Maldives. I run a global brand mapping company for tourism, right? And we do Maldives, we do Nepal, and we know what they have done with integrated campaign on that 1 billion to 4 billion. Number three.
And I want to add to that, if you don't mind, Rwanda, in 2005, when I was a budding journalist at that time, I interviewed the Minister of Tourism in Malaysia. It was that time that they launched the Miracle of Asia campaign. And look at where Malaysian tourism is today. And you're absolutely right.
I mean, I was on the technical committee for Miracle of Asia, Shamir, and that was so very well researched, about to launch. All the people were at BMIC waiting for the launch, and then 2011, what happens? The hierarchy comes and says, no, we have just killed the LTT and we must call big miracle and not small miracle. Finish. That whole game over. Now these are campaign researched. So I'm saying number three, so first is tea, 3 billion. Number two, I'm saying tourism, we can be 4 billion. Have a good marketing campaign. Currently we are getting $166 tourists. We can move to 250. We have the product. We have the current product, which is good. Number three, I will say ICT, currently at 1 billion, 1.5 actually, we can move that to 3 billion. Right now,
do you think with the amount of IT professionals leaving Sri Lanka, do you think we can do more on that front?
See, there's a lot you can do. For example, Murata University has started software engineering MSc, right? I mean, I work also for an education institute. Currently, demand exceeds supply when it comes to IT. There are fantastic skilled people whom I see on a daily basis, right? So I know that, like HCL is saying that they're going for 10 floors at Cinnamon, they want 5,000 people. You have Virtuosa saying 5,000 people. So the demand is there globally for us. All we have to do is to get the people strategy right. You can move that to 3 billion. So you have 4, 3, 7, 10 altogether. I have not talked about Ceylon Cinnamon. I have not talked about Ceylon Sapphire. Both are branded, GI registered. So what I'm trying to say, Shamil, is the debt you talk about 50 billion, that's another story. I would maybe look at that plan with our oil reserves. I don't know. The latest research coming is saying that there is about 400 billion worth of gas and oil, and that is another study that needs to be done as to whether that could be auctioned to the World Bank and whether we could take a loan of about maybe 20-30 billion. It has been done all over the world. So that's another strategy on its own which needs another team. But I'm saying short term, I'm not looking at huge reform. with my hands-on experience, I say, because I served on the T board also, just move this to 10 billion. We don't have to pay debts for the next 10 years. That will come through.
But the problem is, Rohan, you know, you've sat in this team that was looking at a global campaign for tea, for Sri Lankan tea in the world. There are several individuals in the tea industry who call themselves the pioneers of tea, who are the resisting forces to make Sri Lanka a tea hub. I know individuals in the caliber of Rohan Fernando, who is the chairman of Sri Lanka Telecom now, tried to liberalize the country's tea industry during his tenure as the Tea Export Association chairman, but he failed.
Shamir, this is why I'm saying that now, since you have experience, you have the private sector who has a logic to what the argument is. All what we need is from the head of state to say, I stand to your argument. Not to go and say, I don't have reforms to do because we don't have economy, which is totally incorrect, sir. I mean, we have worked in the economy. It doesn't work that way. I mean, if you are looking at the free trade agreement, how come for the last 10 years, we have only 500 million with the Indian FTA? Why is it that this economy, which is going 7.1%, which was announced yesterday, IMF said 7.1%, from 6.8 they moved up to 7.1% GDP growth in India. Why is it that they are a friend of ours? They have come to our need. Why is it that we can't struck a deal to move this to 2 billion? Why is it that we can't get the 7 million pieces of apparel, 1.5 million?
The apparel industry, Rohan, if you didn't know, has dipped significantly since January.
So that's what I'm saying, Shamir. Somebody can't say there is no economy. Why is it that we can't utilize the system?
The president is saying, I am not saying...
That's my argument. That's my argument.
Yeah, but Rohan, I am not, you are looking at me and you're pointing fingers. Samir, don't tell me there is no economy. I have not said that.
That's exactly
the president had said
that. Yes, but that's the point I'm saying. See, guys, I mean, how can a head of state say a thing of this caliber when we have a economy which is 80 billion. Yes, it will shrink by 9%. It will end up at 76 billion. Maybe it will shrink by another 4% next year. It will be 70 billion. 70 billion is a big market. I love the statement he made that Sri Lanka can be education hub, which is true, you know, and I support him 100% on this. So I think we can have a 10 billion economy, but see, when the professionals recommend saying like you, saying I want a tea hub, then this top end must say, okay, I am now prepared to take that unpleasant decision, foregoing 3 or 4 people who are opposing this for the last 10 years. Now, if that is not made, what is the reform?
That bold decision, Rohan, has to be taken, because I recollect 3.5 years ago, Sujit, when I joined the tea industry, I championed the fact that we have to have an e-auction system for the tea industry in Sri Lanka. And individuals laughed at me when I said about an e-auction system. But look at what happened. COVID struck. Yeah. And that's and we ultimately went through a e-auction system.
Shamir, I'll give you one more data. We did an AI study in Australia on what people look for when they buy tea. The first thing they look for happens to be the flavor. The second thing they look for happens to be quality. And number 3, they would look for happens to be the variant that you use. Nobody went and said, I want Ceylon tea.
Nobody said that?
No one. I mean, would you go and say, tell in a restaurant, can I have Ceylon tea? You say, can I have a cup of tea? What is the variant you want? Like, you want green tea? You know. So the point is that is a classic case to say, go for the tea hub proposition, make it 3 billion. Right. Now there, Shamir, again, you don't need to go to IMF to get this approval. We can make that policy decision and that reform. That is reform to my mind.
Yeah. Ravi, I want to ask a question, because you raised this during one of your responses about geopolitics in Sri Lanka. Right, we are in a deal with IMF, and Paris Club also supporting, and non-Paris Club members are basically still discussing. How do you see this geopolitical scenario to play in Sri Lanka's recovery from the current crisis?
Yeah. See, ideal solution is to be non-aligned, so that we get the benefit of everybody and keep the relationships with India, China, US, all these superpowers who are basically concerned about the region, because they don't want any particular party to have a stronger say in Sri Lanka.
Which means you say that we need to compromise.
No, we don't need to compromise anybody. Now, I think the strategy is, if we have given Hambantota to China, we need to give something to India. So that has more or less happened. I think West Germany. So like that.
Now we need to give something to Japan.
Japan, I think, is also being given.
And then US.
So US is already.
So we are following Battula Gunawardhana's proposal.
Very clear it is happening, and also behind India is US. So you can see that clearly there is a lot of geopolitics already at play, and if we keep ourselves non-aligned, I think that is the right way to go, without getting into too much with any particular superpower.
So, Ravi, we always talk about Shihar, just very quickly to Ravi, because we speak about how important the geopolitical landscape is as far as countries are concerned. Look at Sri Lanka. Look at the wealth of resources we have as a nation. We have limestone. Look at the sea, for an example. We have a sea that could be boasted, saying, this is our waters, this is the Sri Lankan Sea, this is the hub as far as anything is concerned. I remember in 1960s when Maersk wanted to come to Sri Lanka and establish a hub in the Sri Lankan Colombo port. Because of politics at that time, they were sent out. And today they have opened one of the biggest hubs in Singapore. And look at the money, look at the TUs. Sujiva spoke about the number of TUs that we can operate. Look at the number of TUs that Singapore operates through Maersk. In that country. Right. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah. So we have lost opportunities. Not only that, I know a particular case when Britain wants to start the electronics industry in Sri Lanka by bringing some companies. We asked for bribes at that time. Not a big sum. At that time it was only 1 million rupees. But they ran away saying, we are not going to do business with you all. And all that business went to South Korea, Malaysia. So we have lost always the opportunities. Now again we have got a fantastic opportunity thanks to this crisis to reform. So I strongly believe we have to make use of it, particularly COVID and this crisis has given Sri Lanka a wake-up call to reform, and we need to make use of that.
This question I think the panel can answer. Now the the income tax and the other taxes are going to be increased from this month, right? And the effect you will see from either end of this month or next month, and then on top of that the IMF conditions, right, where you have to increase some utility prices. Do you what are the risks do you see because of this? Because we saw an economic crisis evolving into a political crisis, and in July the president has to pay the price, right? Likewise, do you see similar kind of risk in these pricing hikes and people coming to the street and protesting against all these price hikes? How do you see Sujiva?
So just one thing to continue on what Rohantha and Ravi mentioned. I think there are some other sectors that we need to pursue, which we haven't done because of our protective policy, just like in tea, right? We have not liberalized. One other sector we have not liberalized is shipping, right? Shipping and freight forwarding we have not liberalized, again because of interested parties, right? Because we have a 40% ownership restriction there, right? I think that's the one thing that you need to do immediately, is that we got to be a massive sort of a hub for shipping, freight forwarding, logistics, support services, you just name it. I think sky is the limit there. We need to do it immediately, right? One other thing is mining, and we have not allowed mining companies to come here. Again, there's a policy issue. We have a 40% ownership restriction. We don't have the know-how, we don't have the technology, we don't have the market access, but we are still saying if you come here you have to be minority, and it needs huge amount of capital investment. And there were a couple of parties who came, they just went away saying at 40% we don't want to be minority because we are running the company, but we don't have a majority on it. Crazy laws.
And if you look at countries like Saudi,
Indonesia.
Nigeria, for an example.
South Africa.
It's not the case.
It's mining. We should and right and
the value addition stays in.
And the value addition, right? The other thing that we haven't really pursued is renewables. I think there's huge amount of opportunity on renewable. I mean, everyone is saying we have excess. We can generate excess energy here. Right?
Because now Minister Kanchana Wijesekara yesterday or the day before yesterday in Parliament said, if the prices of electricity is not increased, there will be 8-hour power cuts in the future. Now the problem is, Sujiva, it's not about the 8-hour power cuts. Look at the cost of the increase that we're talking about.
Tourism
and the impact to business. So, but those
it's very simple for a minister to come to Parliament and say that. But
this is policy. But this is policy decisions.
That's why I'm saying, guys, if a president says there is no economy, we don't have to accept it, guys. That's my point. We have a budding economy. All of us are talking about reforms that could be done tomorrow, Shamir. It could be done next week.
Actually, I would like to highlight that point. But we were discussing about this increase in the prices of these products. So, and also you also point out that IMF will come and will say to increase the utility price. So that is how the people, the rulers in the country is trying to generalize things. So I do not believe IMF will not have any interest to come and say you have to increase the price of those products. What they say is reduce the burden on the fiscal policy. So let me to explain on that little bit. When it comes to this, so they do not have interest about the IMF.
Taxes,
IMF do not have any areas about with this general public to say certain damages. So that is how we generalize certain things. Now, the thing is, when it comes to sustainable privatization proposals, so let me to explain it little, a simple model which consists of 3 stages: selection phase, transition phase, and the sustainability phase. So which have previously implemented by many countries and it is available in the literature. So in the selection phase, we have to do a study, we have to do analysis. So at the moment we are not doing those analysis now. So it's very simple criteria I am pointing out. 2 main criteria. Possibility to reduce the operation cost of this organization. For some organizations possible, some may not. They say. And the second condition, possibility to increase the revenue of these products of this organization. Based on that, we can classify 4 types. They are profit maximizers, revenue enhancers, efficiency enhancers, and unmet public needs. So they recommend do not try to privatize those organizations which are coming under unmet public needs. All other things, there are some potentiality about this. So that is a very simple model I am saying. And when it comes to transition phase, the most important thing is stakeholder engagement. I have not observed in any time that word in practice with our practitioners, with the politicians. Why is that? They always interested in to hide this privatization process from the employees, from the trade union. That is not. This is if we reduce the burden of these organizations, if we make them as efficient as possible, how it can damage the employees of the organization? Tell me how it can happen.
But what if a step in making that organization more efficient is cutting down on the number of employees?
No, that is why I am saying we should communicate that properly. We have to come into agreement with those employees, how their employment will be secured. So it should be a very transparent process, I am referring. Okay?
But don't you think, Madhushankar, now in a situation like that, Georgia could be taken as a classic example. You like it, you stay. If you don't like it, you leave.
Yeah, so just to say see one thing on privatization we need to keep in mind is there are 3 basic factors that you need to comply with. One is you must make sure there is competition. Because otherwise it doesn't matter. It can be government monopoly, and if it's a private sector monopoly, it will be worse than government sector monopoly. That's number 1. Number 2 is that this should be a goods or services that the private sector can provide. Certain things private sector will say we don't want it. Say you want to take CB, say no, we don't want it. Railway, someone will say no, we don't want railway to be there, because it's not something that the private sector can do. So you need to see, is it something that the private sector can do? Third one, can the private sector do it better than what government is doing right now? Otherwise don't do it. I mean, you don't want to be getting...
I have another bird from the frying pan into the fire.
From the frying pan to the fire. So those are the three key things. Before you, most important is competition. Without competition, nothing will happen. And the best example is, see, Sri Lanka Telecom was Department of Telecommunication. You may not even remember, Shamir. There's a Department of Telecommunication. They have to first make it a corporate entity because your department can't be made a company and put it on the stock exchange. So they made it so that corporatization process happened. And credit to Minister Mangala Samravira, I mean, at that time, it's one of the best privatization that we have, because competition, nothing but competition. And
even at that time, Sujio, people were on the streets.
Absolutely. The unions were one of the strongest unions. I'm sure Ravi and Rohanta will remember. I mean, they had one of the strongest unions, but it was communication.
And they got acceptance because Lanka Bell and Suntel was competing so well. They would have been completely wiped out.
Some is 2 points. One is, if you take the railways, there are takers right now. Sure. There are companies who are very strong in logistics, blue chips, who have made propositions because they have done a survey, a ADB study, which shows that 40% of our produce, vegetables and fruits, are wasted because of our logistics system. And they have given a proposal. So, you know, once again I'm saying is, the reforms I'm talking about can be done next week, Shamir. But the answer to Shiham actually is a very important question you asked. Will there be riots? Yes, there will be riots. And this time it will be not the Aragale guys in Golf Face. It will be the white collar workers who will come.
It will be the people who are paying the 36%.
36% tax. Like Shamir.
Why am I the one in this table? I shouldn't be. but at the end of the day, what requires is accountability, transparency and reform. So tonight on the show, we did invite a representative from the Ministry of Finance to come and debate with us, open this dialogue for the public to ensure that we have transparency and we have some discourse. But unfortunately, we could not get any of the representatives from the Ministry of Finance to attend today's discussion. We also invited a representative from the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to attend today's discussion because we're talking about the current state of the country's economy, and it's important to get the reaction from the horse's mouth itself on a debate like this. And unfortunately, again, they did not heed our invitation. But again, time and again, I always say that we don't stay for anyone to host a discussion for the benefit of the political hierarchy in Sri Lanka. We do it solely for the public. So thank you very much, Sujiva Mudlige, CEO of PwC Sri Lanka, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Madhushankar Dissanayaka, Department of Public Administration, University of Sri Jawaharlanapura. Ravya Besubir Surya, Advocacy Chair and Director of CFS Society Sri Lanka. Dr. Rohanta Tukorala, former Chair and EDB, as well as Sri Lanka Tourism. Rohanta is also a celebrated marketeer. Thank you very much, Rohanta, for joining us this evening on the show. Thank you very much, Shania. Thank you very much, Shalan. And Shiha Raniz, Head of Training, Center for Investigative Reporting, Sri Lanka, and Consultant Editor of Economy Next. Thank you very much, Shiha, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. It was very nice to have you on tonight's show. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. The secret of success is to do the common thing uncommonly well. Take care and good night.